We've all been sold this idea that purpose is something you just find, like it's a mystical calling that's going to strike you like a lightning bolt. But the clinical reality, it's not a feeling at all. It's a neurological anchor. And without it, you're not lost. You're technically unanchored. So today, we're going to dig into the neurobiology of purpose. We're moving from just existentially drifting to what we call structural intent. Okay, let's just pause on this for a second, because this reframe is absolutely crucial. That feeling of being aimless, of drifting, that's not some kind of personality flaw. It's not a moral failing. It is a technical problem. Your brain's hardware is missing a critical piece of code, an anchor point. And as soon as you start thinking about it that way, you can move from a place of despair to a place of diagnosis. So let's start right there with that diagnosis. We are living through what you could call a modern meaning crisis. But look, this isn't some philosophical debate for a lecture hall. This thing has real biological symptoms that we can actually identify, measure, and, this is the important part, ultimately correct. And this slide really gets to the heart of it. On the left, you've got the myth we're all told, this passive idea of just waiting around for purpose to find you. But the clinical reality, on the right, well, that's way more empowering. Purpose is an anchor. It's a structure that you actively engineer into your own neurology. It isn't found, it's built. See, without that anchor, your brain just defaults to its base programming. And that's what we call the hedonic treadmill. It's a biological trap, really. Your brain is hardwired to seek dopamine, but with no grand objective to aim for, it just looks for it in the shallows, the next notification, the next social media like, the next impulse purchase. It's just a constant, exhausting chase for a reward that disappears in an instant. So let's get into the mechanics. Let's really look at how this malfunction works inside your brain. How does being unanchored physically change your neural circuitry? Okay, so the key player here is a part of your brain called the ventral striatum. Think of it as your motivation engine. Now, when you have a clear, long-term mission, that engine is humming along, working for you. But without one, it's like it's been chugging espresso all day. It gets jumpy, it gets hyper-reactive to every cheap, short-term buzz that flies by. And that leads directly to the state of dopaminergic volatility. You know that feeling, right? That endless cycle of searching for something, getting a tiny little hit of satisfaction, and then an immediate crash that leaves you feeling even more empty than when you started. That's not just a mood swing. It's a volatile, deeply inefficient, and frankly exhausting neurological state to live in. This slide is such a perfect way to visualize the two ways your brain can use dopamine. So an unanchored brain runs on what we call tonic dopamine. It's like a constant low-level leak of unfocused motivation. Think of a dripping faucet. It's just wasting energy. But a purposeful brain, it uses phasic dopamine. These are powerful, targeted strikes of motivation aimed at a specific, meaningful goal. It is the difference between a weak, flickering floodlight and a focused, high-powered laser. So the whole point here is that a clear, self-defined, sovereign purpose, a goal you choose, free from all the external noise, it gives your prefrontal cortex, which is like your brain's CEO, this incredibly powerful filter. It finally allows you to tune out all the distracting noise of those short-term impulses and focus only on the signal that actually aligns with your long-term mission. But what happens if we don't build this anchor? What if we just keep drifting? Well, the consequences, they're not just about feeling a bit lost. The long-term costs of drifting are severe, both biologically and existentially. And this is what that cascading failure looks like. First, you fall into an existential vacuum. Then your brain becomes parasitically responsive. It just feeds on whatever the algorithm serves up. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that's supposed to do long-term planning, it actually starts to weaken. It atrophies. Your entire life then gets dictated by these bottom-up impulses. And the end state? You hit 45, maybe 50, and realize you've existed, but you haven't truly lived. This quote just nails the psychological trap, doesn't it? We fill that void with busyness, mistaking frantic activity for actual forward motion. It's a defense mechanism, really. It keeps us from having to face that terrifying question. What if my life doesn't actually add up to anything meaningful? Okay, I know that's a bleak picture, but here's the pivot. This is not a life sentence. There is a clear, clinical, and actionable protocol to fix it. We can literally engineer our way out of this crisis. The very first step is mental. You have to reclaim your sovereignty. You have to stop searching for meaning like it's a set of lost car keys. Instead, you start engineering purpose like you're building a skyscraper. It's an active, deliberate, creative process. So here it is, the engineering protocol, broken down into 3 clinical steps. Step 1 is the legacy liquidation, basically a deep audit of your goals to get rid of all the social noise. Step 2 is the responsibility anchor. This is where you take total ownership of a complex challenge. And step 3 is the North Star visualization, which primes your brain for long-term execution and real impact. And what's the result of all this engineering work? What can you expect? Well, the prognosis is excellent. When you implement this protocol, you get tangible, measurable changes to your actual biology. Just look at this data. This isn't some self-help philosophy. This is biology. People with a high sense of purpose have significantly lower levels of circulating cortisol. That's your body's primary stress hormone. You are literally building a more resilient biological system. You're not luckier. You are structurally more stable. And it goes beyond just hormones. You're physically changing your brain's structure. A strong sense of purpose strengthens the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the part of your brain that helps regulate emotion and process challenges. Obstacles stop feeling like threats to your very survival and are instead reframed as simple technical requirements for completing the mission. But I have to give you a critical warning here. The scale of your ambition matters. A lot. Your biology adapts to the demands you place on it. So if you engineer a small, safe, comfortable purpose, you will build a small, fragile brain. The expanse of your purpose quite literally dictates your biological capacity. So the ultimate takeaway is this. To really win, to truly thrive, the mission you engineer for yourself has to be massive. It has to be so compelling, so all-encompassing that it acts like a sun, burning away the shadows of your fear and your doubts. Your purpose becomes your primary immune system. Which leaves us with one final question to think about. The clock is ticking. Are you going to continue to be a passenger, just drifting on the currents of impulse and whatever the algorithm tells you to do? Or are you going to become the engineer, charting a course and arriving at a destination that you designed? The choice is a technical one.
All right, let's get right into it. We've always been told that purpose is something you find, right? Like it's some kind of hidden treasure you're supposed to dig up. But what if we've got that all wrong? What if purpose isn't a feeling at all, but a piece of neurological hardware that you actually have to build yourself? So in this explainer, we're going to show you how to shift from just drifting existentially to having real structural intent. We're going to look at purpose not as some big mystery, but as a biological imperative that you can engineer. And look, the stakes here could not be higher. This isn't about just feeling a little lost or unfulfilled. The way our sources put it, this is a full-blown clinical crisis, and it has very real biological consequences. This crisis of meaning we're all swimming in, it is, quite literally, degrading our hardware. So what exactly is this crisis?
Well, it has a clinical name, the existential vacuum. It's that void, that emptiness you feel when a deep, driving mission just isn't there. And here's the crazy part. In our modern economy, this vacuum has become the main marketplace. It's a goldmine for attention harvesters. When we don't have our own direction, our own mission, we become the perfect customer for theirs.
This leads us straight into what the source material calls the shadow of drifting. This is all about what actually happens to our brain, to our neural hardware, when we live an unanchored life, when we're just reacting instead of acting, moving without any real destination.
So, here's the key idea. Without your own defined sovereign mission, your brain doesn't just, sit there waiting. It becomes what's called parasitically responsive. It just latches onto any external signal it can find. Notifications, trends, whatever noise the market is making. You end up filling that void with busyness, and you start confusing that frantic dopamine buzz with, actual progress, the advancement of your soul.
And this really lays out the internal battle perfectly. See, a life with purpose is run by what's called top-down regulation. Your prefrontal cortex, your brain's CEO, is in charge, guided by a North Star, a long-term vision. But in that existential vacuum, your PFC basically goes dormant. It atrophies. And you flip to a life run by bottom-up impulses. Your day-to-day is dictated by market noise, by primal urges, all chasing those easy short-term rewards.
And the end result of all this? You become an algorithmic ghost. Seriously. You find yourself reacting to trends you don't even care about, chasing a status you don't actually value, all inside a system that literally feeds on your lack of direction. Your own sovereignty is gone, and it's been replaced by an algorithm.
And this path, well, it has a destination. And it's called ontological bankruptcy. It's this state,
often hitting around midlife, where you suddenly realize you spent decades avoiding the hard labor of meaning. You look back and you see that you've survived, but you haven't resonated. You haven't made a real dent because you've been too busy just running on the wheel.
But, and this is a big but, it does not have to be this way. The solution, though, requires a radical shift in how we think about this. We have to stop searching for meaning like it's a lost set of keys and start engineering it like we're building a bridge. It's time to build the anchor.
I just love this quote from our source. It's so empowering, right? Meaning isn't something you dig up from the past. It's a structure you have to design and build, piece by piece. It is an active, creative process, not some passive discovery. And the payoff for this engineering work? It is profound. A well-built purpose acts as a biological alignment. It literally protects your neural hardware from the decay that stress and aimlessness cause. Think of it as preventative maintenance for your most important asset, your brain. So the big question, how do we actually do it? Well, our source material lays out a really clear, actionable framework. It's called the Purpose Engineering Protocol. You can think of it like a set of blueprints for building that neurological anchor we've been talking about. So it breaks down into 3 core steps. First, you've got the legacy liquidation, which is basically a deep audit of your goals. Second is the responsibility anchor, where you find stability by taking on a challenge. And third, the North Star visualization, to prime your brain for long-term execution. All right, let's dig into each one, starting with that first step.
This first step is all about surgical precision. You have to ask yourself this brutally honest question. If the answer is nothing, or something kind of superficial, it means your current goals are probably just noise, things that were put in your head by social pressure or what your friends are doing. The idea is to liquidate them, clear them out, to make room for your sovereign mission, the one core thing that is truly yours, not borrowed from the market.
Next up, we have the anchor. And this one's a bit of a mind bender. We're always taught to avoid stress, right? But the protocol argues you don't need less stress, you need meaningful stress. By taking total ownership of a difficult, complex challenge, something that requires your absolute best, you create a stabilizing force. This is the weight that keeps the ship steady, and it's the only real way to stabilize your brain's reward circuits, specifically something called the ventral striatum. And finally, we get to the daily practice. Now, what's so wild about this is what you're told not to do. For 5 minutes a day, you project yourself into the future. But, and this is key, you are explicitly told not to visualize the rewards, like the money or the status. Instead, you visualize the impact you want to create and the execution, the actual hard work it's going to take. What you're doing is priming your prefrontal cortex to see obstacles not as personal failures or threats, but just as technical requirements that need to be solved.
So what happens when you actually do all this? When you implement this protocol, you fundamentally change your entire state of being. You stop drifting on the random currents of the market, and you start arriving, pulled forward by your own design.
And you can really see the biological transformation right here. The drifter just reacts to every little impulse, living in a state of what's called dopaminergic volatility. You know, those high highs and low lows. The arriver, on the other hand, is pulled by intent. Their reward system, that ventral striatum, is stabilized. The drifter merely survives. The arriver resonates.
So the crucial point to get is that this isn't just a psychological boost. By age 45, your purpose should literally be your primary biological immune system. The source links having this kind of purpose to things like lower chronic cortisol and a more robust brain structure, which makes you way more resilient to all the stress life is going to throw at you.
And this, right here, is the ultimate payoff. Motivation is no longer something you have to grind for or try to find every morning. When your purpose is massive enough, when your intent is crystal clear, it creates its own gravity. You are simply pulled forward by it. You are no longer drifting. You are arriving.
So, what structural change will your life leave on the archive of existence? It's a question worth sitting with in the silence. Subscribe to keep the archive open. Stay silent, stay wise.